Good evening, guys. My name's Jack Kerr, and I am a young designer. So, first things first, when I say a young designer, I don't actually mean by age. So, what I mean is young at heart. Someone who's willing to sort of bounce with the new ideas, take into account what they've learned in the last project, bring it to the new one, are not set in their ways. They want to understand the user more. They want to interact with their new space. They're not going to say, we built that bridge last time, it worked, let's make it do it again. So that design process, where does it start? Who's doing it? And how do they do it? If you're not a creative genius like Gary, who scribbles this and says, this is the Apple headquarters apparently. So this isn't actually Gary, I'm making that up. But they look great, but if you're not that creative genius, how do you iterate and create something that is good design? Because there is no just design, there's either good design or bad design. So the role of the designer is that of a good, thoughtful host anticipating the needs of his guest, according to Charles Eames. So you've got to walk in their shoes, but how do you do that if it's a mega structure, this huge, huge thing that you're trying to build, and how you go about building it? So now we're going to look at the concept, well, some of the ideas that were part of the concept design for the Aberdeen Harbour. So the Aberdeen Harbour is an existing harbour in Aberdeen, surprisingly. And what they needed to do was they needed to expand it. So they looked around and they found, I think this is a pointer, they found Nig Bay, which is just south of the existing harbour. So they said, this bay looks great, let's build the harbour there. So they put it out to tender, and lots of different people came back with lots of different ideas. And someone won based on their cost and their vision of the future, and they started coming together with the design. So first things first, they said, let's use caissons. The contractor is Spanish, and they know people who make caissons. So caissons are kind of like chests of drawers. You drag them across the sea, you dredge where you want to put them, fill them with soil, and sink them. So that's what they did. So, well, they didn't. That's what they did, hypothetically, to check it. So this would be what the harbour would look like, composed of many different caissons put together, pop the in situ on top, you're away. So this then being dragged across the sea. But then, not so good. So basically, this is the North Sea, which is kind of choppy. So what they were finding was that things didn't look good for Brian and Lisa. So what did they say? They said, we need a breakwater. We need a breakwater fast. How do we do it? Well, we put it on here, and we build this kind of like a draft excluder, for want of a better term, and they cover it in these acropods. So Brian and Lisa look a little bit happier there. Harbourside looks nice and calm. Everything's looking good. Yep, delighted. What are these acropods? Well, they're just enormous lumps of concrete. I mean, massive. Really, really very heavy, really very, very hard to put in place, but there's hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds, and they make them on site, and they crack, and they do terrible things, and they give us a headache. So they put those in place, and then they went inside and said, good heavens, this looks a little bit bumpy. Why is it so bumpy? Well, basically, if you use caissons, which are nice and cheap, and they know things, what happens is you create a very reflective surface, and you get this constructive wave. Well, you get this constructive interference. You get an enormous wave, which is not good. So they decided they'd swap the caissons for slightly more expensive open key, which are these pile designs. So that's a table. That's meant to be a table. Exactly the same structured concept as a table. You've got props, and then you put the working surface on top. Away you go. So they put in these props, and this is what our harbour is looking like now. So these are down the end. The caissons up here, because they're a wee bit cheaper, and we don't need them everywhere. So, how does that look? Oh, it looks great. So, this is the concept idea of Aberdeen Harbour. And this is before you get into any numbers, this is before you get into any sort of actual sort of number crunching. And then obviously that stage comes next, and that's the stage that I've been involved in. You're producing drawings, you're thinking about where does the rebar go, you're thinking about how does this work, what loads do we put on it, and how do we design for the future. Design is always going to be judged by tomorrow's standards, so you have to think ahead how the structure is going to be used. These are some of the sort of things that we look at. We say, good heavens, this is really very complicated. Let's make 3D images, send it to the contractor and say, believe me, I know it says that on the drawing, but we can actually build it. So that is just a little intro into what goes into concept design. Thank you very much.